Hey everyone, Ethan here. This video is a follow-up to a follow-up to a follow-up on my 3 previous videos on the multiple iterations of Pokemon Red and Blue. If you haven't seen those videos, I highly recommend watching them first. Before I properly get into the video, I just wanted to extend a huge thank you to everyone who watched my previous video on Fire Red and Leaf Green. As of now, the video is the highest viewed on my channel by a pretty decent margin. Nothing motivates me more than people watching and interacting with my videos. Thank you all again. I also want to apologize in advance if my voice sounds all over the place, as I'm getting over being sick and have a cough that does not want to go away. Much like me feeling the need to explain generations before talking about the games themselves, this time I need to talk about the sole reason for Let's Go's existence, that being Pokemon Go. If you somehow haven't heard, Pokemon Go is a Pokemon mobile game released in 2016 and was a global phenomenon. I don't want to exaggerate when I say this, but at the time it truly felt like everyone was playing it. From my first-hand experience, if you went out into public and saw someone walking around looking down at their phone, chances are they were playing this game. So why was it so popular? What did you even do in the game? Well, basically, it took your real-world location and had you exploring your surroundings catching Pokemon. It was very simple and pretty engaging. The act of going outside and walking around catching Pokemon was something fans dreamed of for so long. It brought people together talking about where to find rare Pokemon and what their team allegiance was. Obviously, I would never say mine since Team Instinct was the least popular and I didn't want to get shunned, but, you know, still a great time. I'll never forget all the memories I made with my friends playing that game. Either way, Nintendo obviously wanted to capitalize on the cash cow to end all cash cows, so Pokemon's first outing on Switch was to be a Gen 1 remake with connections and mechanics borrowed from Pokemon Go. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee to this day are kind of outliers in the Pokemon series for how different they are, in some ways at least. They're remakes of Pokemon Yellow, yes, Yellow, not Red and Blue. So that means that they split one game that was an enhanced version of 2 games into 2 games. They're connected to Pokemon Go, letting you transfer Pokemon from that game into these, and even have a similar catching mechanic. There's even 2 new Pokemon, Meltan and Melmetal, exclusive to Go that were seemingly made to promote transferability to Let's Go. So in a way, their existence is the exact opposite of Fire Red and Leaf Green in that they didn't really need to exist and nobody really asked for them. But hey, it's Pokemon, so they're still fun. Like I did last time, I want to start with the additions that come from these games being made in the 7th generation of Pokemon. Funnily enough though, there aren't that many changes overall, at least not as many as you'd think for releasing 4 generations after the previous Kanto games. One of the most impactful changes is Generation 6's addition of the Fairy type. The type was retroactively given to the Clefable, Wigglytuff, and Mr. Mime evolution line, with it outright replacing the Clefable line's normal type and being an addition for Wigglytuff and Mr. Mimes. Next is what is commonly referred to as the Physical Special Split, which basically just changes moves so that whether a move is physical or special is determined by the action of the move rather than the type the move is. In a similar vein, Generation 5 made it so that TMs now have infinite uses. Gen 7 also started the trend of making HMs usable without having to teach them to your Pokemon. Next up is Alolan forms of Kanto Pokemon. The previous set of games in this generation were Sun and Moon, which introduced the concept of regional variants, which were new forms of older Pokemon with new types and rearranged stats. These games give you access to those forms through in-game trades with the cost of that Pokemon's Kantonian counterpart. This essentially boosts the amount of choices for team members by 10. Lastly is Mega Evolution, which without getting too much into it is an extra evolution that select Pokemon can temporarily use in battle only, if you have the required item. Although Mega Evolution is locked to the end of the game and beyond, so it doesn't have a huge presence. This is usually where I'd move on to the next section, but Let's Go in particular actually straight up removes staple features that were in previous and even future games, those of which being held items and abilities. My best guess for their removal is that Game Freak wanted the games to play more like the originals. Even then though, it doesn't really make sense to remove these features but keep all the other new stuff. Personally, I think the lack of those 2 features bogged down battling, making them less interesting and dynamic overall. Let's get into what makes Let's Go unique from the other Kanto games. In terms of plot, it's very similar to Yellow, but this time your rival has been replaced by a completely different nameable rival. The characters of Red and Blue that were previously the canon versions of the player and rival characters in RBY and FRLG are now their own separate characters. Blue actually pops up throughout the story from time to time and is even set up for his role in the Generation 2 games. A new character in Green is also added who is a character from the manga adaptation of Pokemon. I haven't read the manga, so I don't really know anything about her. Archer from the Gen 2 games is also brought into this game, I'm assuming to make his appearance in Gen 2 flow better. He was also technically an FRLG, but he was only referred to as a Rocket admin. Speaking of Team Rocket though, since this is a Yellow remake, the trio is back and even gets a little more time in the spotlight with a somewhat satisfying conclusion. Mina from the Sun and Moon games also makes a guest appearance, being able to battle her and her Fairy-type Pokemon. For your starter, much like Yellow, you get an unevolvable Pikachu or Eevee depending on the version you chose, with your rival getting the opposite one, although theirs can and will eventually evolve. The game also features cutscenes for important moments like receiving your starter, encountering a legendary, and a few other key moments from the story. Also, as a quick side note, I love the changes they made to Blaine and his gym in these games. I love how goofy and over the top he is. His gym is easily one of my favorite parts of Let's Go. #BlaineSweep. This game offers a fair bit of difference and even some exclusivity in terms of gameplay. There is no bike this time around, but instead you can now have one of your party Pokemon follow you around. This feature has been seen sporadically throughout the series, but in my opinion, it's at its best in these games. Each Pokemon has their own walking and interacting animations, and you could even ride on a handful of them. After you beat the game, there's even a select few that you can fly on. They nailed this feature, and I especially love how the Pokemon are scaled pretty much perfectly. Now though, if there's no bicycle, then what's up with Cycling Road? Well, it's been replaced with Pokemon Road. It's still a long stretch of land, but now it's littered with wild Pokemon and trainers hanging out with their Pokemon. Speaking of trainers, two exclusive variants of them exist in these games. The first of which are Coach Trainers. Coach Trainers are typically stronger than normal trainers, have some sort of gimmick of difficulty to them, and grant an additional reward on top of Pokédollars after they're defeated. I love Coach Trainers and wish they were used in future games instead of being seemingly forgotten. The other variant is the Master Trainers. Once you beat the Pokemon League, you're able to challenge Master Trainers. They only have one Pokemon and can only be fought one-on-one with that same Pokemon. There is one Master Trainer for each Pokemon in the game, not including Alolan forms, totaling 153. The reward for beating them is a trainer title. So if you beat Gengar's Master Trainer, for example, you can have your trainer title changed from Pokemon Trainer to Gengar Master. The last and arguably biggest difference comes in the form of stat candies. Without going down a huge rabbit hole, Gen 1 and 2 have a separate way of handling stats from the rest of the series, as Gen 3 adopted the EV and IV system that is still used to this day. Let's Go is actually an outlier as it uses a completely different stat system from every mainline game. Instead of knocking out Pokemon to make hidden numbers go up, you instead use candies which are earned through catching and releasing Pokemon. My issue with it arises when you realize that the cap for how many candies you could use per stat is crazy high. To put it in perspective, you can raise each of a Pokemon's 6 stats by 200 points each. While with the other system, you could only raise 2 stats by a maximum of 60-ish points. This makes Master Trainer battles extremely annoying because their Pokemon have high candy investment in their important stats, meaning that you have to grind candies for a while just to get one Pokemon ready for their respective Master Trainer. I ended up only beating the Gengar Master after a bit of candy investment and using all of my rare candies to get it to level 97. Even then, I likely only won because I was able to use Mega Evolution. Let's Go significantly changes how you go about encountering and catching Pokemon. These games were the first to introduce the concept of encountering wild Pokemon in the overworld. Now, instead of running through patches of grass, you can see the Pokemon themselves and run into them to try to capture them. This is an amazing idea, and it's easily one of, if not my favorite additions to Pokemon in the past few years. There's also the new Lure item, which makes wild Pokemon appear in higher numbers, as an opposite to Repels. Catching is also quite a bit different, but these changes are exclusive to these games and didn't return afterwards. Once you run into a wild Pokemon, instead of a battle like in the past, the catching minigame is incredibly similar to how you catch Pokemon in Pokemon Go. The Pokemon will be right in front of you with a pair of circles overlaid on them, and you must aim and throw your Pokeball and attempt to hit inside the circles for your best chance at a successful capture. In Go, you use your touchscreen to throw, while in Let's Go, it depends on if you're playing in docked or handheld mode. In docked mode, you mimic a throwing motion with your Joy-Con either forward, to the left, or right. This feels kind of janky, and I didn't even know how to properly throw left or right until I got to the post-game. I knew I was doing it wrong before that point, but didn't know the right way, and as far as I'm aware, the game doesn't tell you how to throw anywhere but forward. Once I did learn, it was okay, but I much preferred using handheld. In handheld mode, you move the Switch itself around until you're lined up with the circles and simply press A. I really wish there was an option in the game to allow you to not use motion controls at all. A simple solution would have been to control the screen with the analog stick and throw with A, similarly to handheld mode. Either way though, this game also borrows the berry items from Go. The raspberries make successful throws more likely to catch. Nana berries make the Pokemon move around less, making it easier to land your throws. And pineapple berries make it so you receive more items if your next throw catches the Pokemon. Also, if enough time passes, the Pokemon can flee the battle, usually doing a specific animation before they run. Significant wild encounters like Legendaries, Snorlax, and Electrode actually have you battle them with a 5-minute timer and knock them out before the catching minigame starts, which is pretty cool. I think I do prefer the method of battling wild Pokemon that's in previous games, but I don't dislike this way of catching apart from the controls themselves. It also made managing your Pokemon way more convenient by making your PC storage accessible from anywhere, which is a great quality of life feature. If you catch the same species of Pokemon in succession, you'll start a catch combo, which has a variety of uses. You'll earn more rewards from each battle, make shiny Pokemon more likely to appear, and increase your chances of finding rarer Pokemon. Let's Go removed the Safari Zone in favor of Go Park, where you can transfer your Pokemon from Go and re-catch them in Let's Go. Because of the lack of Safari Zone, Pokemon that were previously exclusive to it have been scattered throughout the region. Not only that, but Pokemon like the 3 starters, Eevee, Porygon, Lapras, the Hitmoduo, and Pokemon that were once only available through in-game trades are now catchable in the wild. This felt like such a step in the right direction, as the only Pokemon you're unable to get are the version exclusives. While I've made my opinions on version exclusives clear in the past, at the very least they can technically be mitigated by catching and transferring those Pokemon from Go. As another feature, now you can trade your Pokemon over the internet, which was never an option in RBY or FRLG. Eventually, when the Switch's online services are shut down, this will no longer be the case. Thankfully though, even when you do want to trade in person, you won't need a cable of any sorts to do so. Lastly, because of how easy it is to get most Pokemon, this was the first game that I've made a video on where I chose to not only complete the Pokédex, but also get a living dex, which is 1 copy of each Pokemon. Ever since Pokemon games went into the 3rd dimension and subsequently gained access to trainer customization in Generation 6, it has become one of the most important parts of Pokemon for me. While customization was not in RBY or FRLG or even Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which were Gen 6 remakes of Ruby and Sapphire, it wasn't expected to return in these remakes either. It not only returns in Let's Go, but it actually has an aspect to it that hasn't been seen since. At the start of the game, you can choose whether you're a male or female, which is something I forgot to mention in my Fire Red and Leaf Green video. And also your skin tone / hair color / eye color from 4 presets for each gender. In these games, you can change your trainer's hat, top, bottoms, shoes, and your bag. Unfortunately, you cannot remove your hat altogether though. Exclusive to Let's Go, you can also customize your partner Pokemon's hat, glasses, and outfit, whether it be Pikachu or Eevee. Ironically enough, you can choose your partner Pokemon not to have a hat. I also wish you could wear glasses yourself, but that isn't an option here. You obtain outfits mostly in sets, by either having them gifted to you by NPCs or by buying them in the Celadon department store. I ended up going for a half Sailor, half Team Rocket look, as I tried to get any orange I could into my outfit, but mostly had to settle for my second favorite color of blue. My Eevee somewhat reflected my style by having the sailor outfit with blue sunglasses and a Diglett hat. Funnily enough, I went over to my personal playthrough save file of Let's Go Pikachu and found that Pikachu had a similar outfit. Overall, at this point in time, the only other games that had customization up to this point in time were X and Y, and Sun and Moon, and I think that those games had much more options and ways to express yourself. However, I don't think Let's Go did a bad job by any means, and I'm glad the feature is there. One last thing that I guess probably fits best here is that you can interact with your partner Pokemon by petting them and feeding them berries, which both increase their friendship towards you. I've never really cared for this feature, but I figured it was worth mentioning. For this video, if it wasn't made obvious already, I played Let's Go Eevee. Although much like I did for Yellow, I did not use my partner Eevee pretty much at all, so she just stayed on my shoulder the whole game. I did end up eventually naming her Barnaby because that's what it sounds like she's saying when you have her use a secret technique. This time for my playthrough, I ended up mostly using Pokemon that I had never used before. 2/3 of them actually. My team consisted of Stuart the Victory Bell, Waka the Dugtrio, Nova the Flareon, Mimi the Starmie, Kitsune the Alolan Ninetales, and Helios the Gengar. I had a pretty fun time with this team apart from some issues I have with the game, which I'll go into more soon. Although I made a short-sighted decision when putting together the team that made it so that I basically didn't obtain 4 members until the second half of the game, and when I did, it was all at the same time. As a fun fact, the Alolan Ninetales and Gengar are both from Pokemon Go, because I wouldn't have been able to nickname the Ninetales if I had traded for it, and I didn't want to rely on anyone for time purposes to trade with Gengar, so I just transferred my own. Thank you to Lunatium/Viper073 for not only suggesting Flareon's and Alolan Ninetales creative names, but for also helping me complete my Pokedex by trading me a Mankey and Scyther. Also, thank you to Chalk075 for Starmie's nickname, and Elven Scout 44 for Dugtrios. Before I move on, I want to highlight all of the Pokemon I've used thus far throughout my now 4 playthroughs for videos. I want to keep track of and update this as time goes on. On here are all of the final forms of Pokemon I could have used during a main story playthrough. Each Pokemon will have their own border, which will be colored based on which generation they're from. The Pokemon with the highlighted backgrounds are the ones I've used thus far and will also have their background colors correspond to the original generation's game I used them in. The difficulty in Let's Go really threw me for a loop. Typically, games will start easy and ramp up the difficulty over time as you get more used to it to challenge you. In my opinion, the opposite happens in Let's Go. I usually wait until the end of this section to mention this, but I lost a total of 11 times, with 9 of them being during the main story. I will say though that most of my losses came from me expecting it to be easier or more like RBY or FRLG. The biggest reason I could think of for things being more difficult in the beginning is movesets. Misty is a great example of this because her Psyduck has a Psychic move which is super effective against all grass types catchable at that point in the game. If I had faced her with only my then Bellsprout in any other Kanto game, I would have won pretty easily. That's not a knock against the game though, I actually like that it's more difficult. For record's sake, I lost to the coach trainer with the Meowth on Route 3, the trainer in Misty's gym with the Seal which flinched me using Headbutt 2 turns in a row, Misty 3 times, the first 2 were with Bellsprout, and the third was right after it had evolved into Weeping Bell. Lieutenant Surge once because I didn't train up my Diglett enough yet. The coach trainer on Route 8 because I only had Diglett in my party to not overlevel Stuart. And Archer in the Rocket Hideout twice. I was just outmatched here. My 2 post-game losses were to Blue because I was not prepared for him to lead with Tauros, and he was also like 10 levels higher. And Mewtwo wiped me with Psychic, which was just a skill issue on my part. If anything, the fact that all of my main story losses took place while I had 2 or less team members somewhat highlights that I should have spaced out catching my teammates rather than choosing 4 that were all caught within an hour of each other. As you get further in the game though, things will be easier and easier if you are playing with a consistent team. This is due to the game's combination of the friendship and affection system. In past games, friendship only affected some Pokemon's evolutions and the base power for the moves Return and Frustration. It would increase throughout the game by knocking out Pokemon and leveling up. Affection was an optional feature introduced in Gen 6 which gave extra benefits for interacting with your Pokemon, like earning more experience points in battle, surviving moves on 1 HP that would have otherwise KO'd, avoiding attacks, healing status conditions, and even increasing their chance to land critical hits. This was completely fine because you could ignore it and play the game normally. However, Let's Go's combination of the two made the benefits unavoidable. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining about the games benefiting me, but it sometimes feels unfair that I have these perks when my opponents don't. I guess I just wish that they could have made the affection benefits optional is all. You can make the game even easier if you want with the couch co-op mode. It works as a drop-in, drop-out where the second player can run around with you, but not interact with NPCs or items. They will also accompany you when catching or battling. In battle specifically, they make all fights 2-on-1. On a much more positive note though, I didn't know going into my replay of these games that the gym leaders had changes made to their teams, all of which are for the better in my opinion. Every gym leader has what I would consider to be the perfect team for them in these games. They even tried to make the Elite Four's teams better, although I still don't know why they had Bruno keep an Onix instead of replacing it with Primeape, and you could only do so much for Agatha and Lance, but I like that with the former they leaned into just making her a poison type user, and diversifying Lance's team referencing Seadra's Dragon type evolution and Charizard's Dragon type Mega for the latter. I also like how they seem to diversify the Pokemon that trainers use throughout the game. I felt like I saw a much wider variety of Pokemon. Although unfortunately, trainer battles seem to give you less EXP in these games, so I ended up avoiding quite a lot of them and just caught wild Pokemon instead. The post-game this time around not only gave the Elite Four new team members, but the gym leaders became rematchable and had whole new teams to go along with it. I have no complaints on the gym leader side as all of them were perfect in my opinion. And I love how each Elite Four member gained an Alolan form that matched their typing. Except for Bruno, because there was no fighting type Alolan form. My only big complaints for team composition pertains to red, blue, and green. Why would they have the characters named after the colors of the 3 starter types not have the starter of that type? Red having Venusaur, blue having Charizard, and green having Blastoise makes no sense to me. I want to now talk about my personal grievances with these games that I feel didn't fit well anywhere else. I hope I'm not sounding too overly negative in this video. I did quite enjoy my time playing Let's Go. Although it feels like these remakes do a lot of cool, new, or interesting things, but are then bogged down twofold by weird decisions or omissions. A good example of this is how earlier I praised the game for adding new story content or small additions to give context to the Gen 2 games. However, Let's Go for some reason takes away some of your freedom by making the game slightly more linear, and has specific requirements before you're able to fight some gyms. For linearity in RBY and FRLG, you can initially skip Misty until after the SSN as long as you've visited Bill. However, in Let's Go, you have to both beat Misty and visit Bill before going to Vermilion City for the first time. This change restricted me from catching Diglett until after I obtained my second badge. Although now that I think about it, since secret techniques don't require badges to use them, you might be able to battle Blaine as soon as you obtain the technique in Fuchsia City. So I guess you win some and lose some. Some of the gyms now need specific requirements to be met before you challenge them. Brock's gym requires you to have a water or grass type Pokemon. For Misty's gym, you need a Pokemon that is at least level 15. For Koga's gym, you need to have caught 50 different species of Pokemon. And for Sabrina's, you need a Pokemon that is at least level 45. I don't really see the need for this, and especially in Brock and Koga's case, requires you to play a certain way even if you don't want to. This game also takes away options by making the EXP share, which since Gen 6 affects your entire party, mandatory. That means if you want to try to prevent overleveling, you have to take that Pokemon out of your party. I also really wish that Let's Go added evolutions of Kanto Pokemon that were added in later generations. I actually completely understand not having all 809 existing Pokemon at the time in these games, but I feel like a good compromise would have been adding the evolutions mostly from Gen 2 and 4. This would have given players many more options to play through the game with. I guess a practical reason against this would be that most of those Pokemon require held items, which is understandable. The last and arguably most questionable omission in Let's Go is the lack of content of the Sevi Isles. In my personal opinion, if a game, even if it's a remake, adds new content and then the game is remade or re-released again, it should include that new content. I also don't think the excuse of these being yellow remakes instead of red and blue or fire red and leaf green remakes works here, since yellow is an enhanced version of red and blue. In terms of graphics, Let's Go has its own unique 3D art style that separates itself visually from both past and future 3D Pokemon titles, and hasn't been seen since. It's up to personal preference if you prefer this over Fire Red and Leaf Green, since both look great in their own ways. Let's Go did a great job at bringing Kanto to 3D and making it look detailed in the process. However, this does look a little jarring to me at times because the tile grid layout sometimes clashes with the 3D art, if that makes sense. Although I do want to quickly mention that I love what they did with the gyms. I love that all of them have seats with an audience. For the music this time, the entire soundtrack has an orchestral sound and a playful tone. I'm pretty neutral on this soundtrack, with most tracks sounding on par with their RBY and FRLG counterparts. My two favorite tracks in these games are Arrival Appears, which plays whenever Blue shows up, and the Master Trainer battle theme. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee were released in 2018 on the Nintendo Switch. As a reminder, Let's Go is a remake of Pokemon Yellow, which is an enhanced version of Pokemon Red and Blue. Since Let's Go is still quite new, they've only been released once, and have both digital and physical versions. You can still find copies of Let's Go in retail stores, especially GameStop. Whether you get it physically or digitally, it'll end up costing you $60 USD. No ambiguity here this time. Nintendo is unfortunately notorious for never putting their games on sale, so if you want it, then just buy it. It's still gonna be full price 5 years from now. As always, I consider Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee to be the same game, because they are like 98% the same. As for where I want them placed, I thought about it quite a bit, but in the end I decided that Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee should be in the number 6 spot between Plants vs. Zombies and Mario Superstar Baseball. While it's not easy to explain exactly why it's in the exact spot it's in, I can tell you why it's below FRLG and above RB and Y. RBY's jank, bugginess, and age will always make it feel less fun to go back to. But the lack of battle nuance like held items and abilities, and lack of Seviiles keeps it from being nearly as good as Fire Red and Leaf Green. Also, I promise at some point to make a better looking top 10 list, even though by the time I do, it'll probably be a top 20 or maybe more list. Now that I'm done with the Kanto games, I'm going to take a break from Pokemon videos for a bit. However, even though it's far away, I still want to show most of my team for my eventual playthrough of Gold and Silver. If you have any nicknames to suggest, please do so in the comments. You have lots of time to come up with something, so don't be afraid to come back to this in a few months from now. Thank you all so much for watching. Which team did you choose to side with in Pokemon Go? I picked Instinct cause Zapdos absolutely clears Moltres and Articuno. Also, which of my Kanto teams was your favorite? FRLG was mine, with Let's Go being second. I look forward to any feedback you want to send my way. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, comment whatever thoughts this video made you have, and share it if you really want to. Thanks again, and I hope to see you again soon.
What is wrong with you? Why are you blue?